Some call it fate, others call it karma. But when justice strikes back instantly, the results can be downright chilling. A man who was hoisted by his own petard, blown out of a plane by the very bomb he planted. A serial rapist and murderer who met his end in the courtroom at the hands of 200 enraged women seeking vengeance. And a brutal serial killer, infamous for his crimes, who was stabbed to death in the very prison he was meant to rot in. These are the stories where fate delivered swift and brutal justice. This is the most shocking cases of instant karma, Part 1. Imagine boarding a flight, settling into your seat, and moments later, disaster. That's exactly what happened on February 2, 2016, aboard Dalo Airlines Flight 159. But here's the twist. The explosion wasn't a tragic accident. It was a plan gone horribly wrong for one man. Abdullahi Abdisalam Borleh, a 55-year-old Somali national, had smuggled a bomb onto the flight, intending to bring down the entire plane. Surveillance footage later revealed two men, believed to be airport employees, handing him a laptop containing explosives just before takeoff. But fate, or pure irony, had other plans. Just 20 minutes into the flight, at about 14,000 feet, the device detonated, tearing a gaping hole in the fuselage. But instead of dooming everyone on board, the explosion ejected only one person, Borleh himself. Sucked out of the aircraft, he plummeted to his death, his twisted plan backfiring spectacularly. The plane? It miraculously survived. The pilots managed an emergency landing, and every other passenger lived to tell the tale. Ironically, most passengers, including Borleh, were originally booked on a canceled Turkish Airlines flight. Sometimes karma doesn't wait. It just takes one wrong seat, one bad decision, and one brutal twist of fate to turn a would-be mass murderer into his own only victim. For over a decade, Aku Yadav ruled the slums of Nagpur, India through fear and violence. A notorious gangster and serial rapist, he terrorized women, breaking into homes, assaulting victims, and even parading them naked to send a message. No one could stop him. The police? Useless. Every complaint was met with bribes, laughter, or silence. Yadav bragged that he'd never be punished. But on August 13, 2004, karma arrived, not as a courtroom sentence, but as a mob of furious women with nothing left to lose. In Nagpur District Court Number 7, Yadav's arrogance sealed his fate. He mocked a woman he had raped, calling her a prostitute. The room erupted. Between 200 and 400 women armed with knives, chili powder, and raw rage stormed the courtroom. They stabbed him over 70 times, slashed off his genitals, and left him dead in a pool of his own blood. The police, overwhelmed and terrified, fled the scene. No single woman was convicted, because who could blame them? For years, the system had failed them. In the end, justice wasn't served by the courts. It was taken back in the most brutal way possible. Sometimes karma wears a judge's robe, and sometimes it carries a blade forged from years of unpunished crimes. For decades, Roger Kibbe terrorized California's highways, leaving a trail of brutalized victims along Interstate 5. Known as the I-5 Strangler, he was eventually convicted of raping and murdering at least 7 women between 1977 and 1987, though investigators suspect his true body count may be higher. But in 2021, at the age of 81, Kibbe's reign of terror met an abrupt end in a prison cell, and justice didn't bother with a trial. Serving multiple life sentences at Mule Creek State Prison, Kibbe found himself sharing a cell with Jason Boudreau, a tattooed Satanist already doing life for murder. Within hours, the predator becomes prey. Boudreau later admitted to strangling Kibbe with his bare hands, claiming he had planned the execution for months after learning about Kibbe's crimes. His motive? To avenge Kibbe's victims, and in his words, free their souls. When guards discovered Kibbe's lifeless body, the cause of death was clear: manual strangulation, a grim echo of how Kibbe had dispatched his own victims. The hunter had become the hunted. Boudreau made no attempt to hide his actions. Instead, he calmly informed authorities of his deed, viewing it as an act of dark justice. No appeals, no delays, just cold, calculated retribution. Because sometimes, karma doesn't just come full circle. It shares your cell and waits for lights out. For years, women in Boston lived in terror as a serial killer strangled 13 victims in their own homes. The man behind it? Albert DeSalvo claimed to be, but doubts linger for decades. In 2013, DNA evidence finally linked him to at least one murder, but fate had already dealt its own verdict long before. From 1962 to 1964, DeSalvo terrorized Boston, earning nicknames like the Measuring Man and the Green Man for his earlier crimes. In 1967, he was sentenced to life in prison, not for the Strangler murders, but for unrelated sexual assaults. Despite his detailed confessions to the killings, lack of physical evidence left the case officially unsolved. On November 25, 1973, DeSalvo's story took a shocking turn. DeSalvo was found stabbed to death in his prison cell. His killer was never officially identified, leaving a cloud of mystery over his demise. Some speculate it was a hit ordered by fellow inmates who saw him as a monster. Others wonder if DeSalvo was silenced before he could change his story. But one thing is clear: his life ended as violently as those of his victims. Decades passed, but the case refused to rest. In July 2013, a breakthrough came. DNA from DeSalvo's nephew, collected from a discarded water bottle, provided a familial match to evidence from Mary Sullivan's 1964 murder scene. This led to the exhumation of DeSalvo's body, where direct DNA testing confirmed his link to Sullivan's death with 99.9% certainty. The man who once confessed to strangling women in silence met his own bloody end. Because sometimes, justice doesn't wait for DNA or courts, it strikes with its own brutal hand. Yet even in death, DeSalvo's legacy continues to haunt Boston, a grim reminder of a terrifying chapter in the city's history. Mark Hoffman, a former Mormon missionary turned master forger and murderer, built an empire of fraudulent historical documents in the early 1980s. His elaborate scams fooled collectors, historians, and even the Mormon Church, as he expertly forged letters from prominent figures like Joseph Smith, George Washington, and Mark Twain. Hoffman's most infamous forgery was the White Salamander letter, which threatened to rewrite Mormon history by suggesting that Joseph Smith was led to the golden plates by a magical white salamander rather than an angel. This document, along with hundreds of others, exploited public interest in Latter-day Saint and American history. As suspicions grew and his schemes began to unravel, Hoffman resorted to desperate measures. On October 15, 1985, he planted 2 pipe bombs in Salt Lake City, killing document collector Stephen Christensen and Kathleen Sheets, the wife of Christensen's former employer. The next day, while transporting another bomb, Hoffman's own device exploded prematurely in his car, severely injuring him. Hoffman barely survived the blast, suffering severe injuries. Investigators quickly unraveled his schemes, exposing his attempts to manipulate and embarrass the Mormon Church. Instead of a fortune, he landed a life sentence in prison. A master deceiver, betrayed by his own deadly lie. In the end, Hoffman didn't just forge history, he sealed his own fate. Because sometimes karma doesn't wait for justice, it detonates. They committed unspeakable crimes, believing they'd never pay the price, but fate had a crueler, more fitting punishment in store. Whether it was the hands of the people they wronged, the brutality of prison life, or the sheer irony of their own plans backfiring, karma delivered in ways no one could have predicted. But what do you think? Was it justice, or just a twist of fate? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more shocking true crime stories. Some criminals fear the law, but in the end they should fear karma even more. Stay tuned for part 2.